Hello and welcome to a pro basketball show with me, Andrew Willett. We're in the midst of WNBA coverage and excited to bring our content to you. You can catch a pro basketball show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram, with more coming soon. Without further ado, a pro basketball show. Hello and welcome to a pro basketball show. We are getting set and ready for the WNBA season just days away, and today we're going to talk about a historic team in the W, but unfortunately for the last season, not one of the league's best, but we are definitely excited for their 2023 campaign, and that is the Indiana Fever. To talk some Fever, I'm happy to welcome to the show, covering the Fever, beat for the Next Hoops, also covers the Pacers for SI Pacers, Forbes Sports, WTHR.com, and Locked On Pacers. From Indiana University, it's Tony East. Tony, thank you so much for joining. I know it's a busy time of the year. How are you?
I'm good. It is a busy time of the year. So much Indiana in my bio. It sounds made up. How many times you just said the state?
You went through. You're doing a lot, especially for the Pacers. But I'm excited to get you talking Fever today. So let's get right into it. What's the temperature take of the Fever right now?
They're in an interesting spot, right? They have a new coach. They're kind of set into, a new kind of era and culture. They have a new head coach. They hired Lynn Dunn, their new GM, last February, right? And that all, has kind of moved them forward as a franchise, I would say. Like, it feels all like they've been in this era of Fever basketball for a long time because they've been near the W basement for so many years, but they're only 14, 15 months removed from Tamika Catchings being their GM and Marianne Stanley being their head coach, right? It's still all pretty fresh and new. And this year specifically with Christy Sides at the helm, it just feels refreshing, right? There's a new aura around the team. There's more smiles. Everybody says they're having fun coming into work every day, which they've all really enjoyed. And so the temperature take of the Fever would be just a team that, they kind of know it's going to be some hurdles and they're in year one of a new era, but they're also really excited about what the new stages are going to be.
Yeah, Tony, going through, I did the Los Angeles preview recently, and it was like Derek Fisher was the coach not that long ago. That was just last season. So I can see where you're coming from. It feels like it's been a long time, but for Indiana, I think they've made it a long way. We're going to start here with their preview by taking a step back and looking at their season a year ago. Finished with a 5-31 record as the 12th seed in the WNBA. And there's very little sugarcoat in that, as they haven't made the playoffs since 2016. That's 3 times they've been the worst seed in the W. Last year they finished the regular season 12th in both offensive and defensive rating. So I'm curious from your vantage point, what are some takeaways that you can take from last season?
Shrug a little bit, when you go 5-31 and kind of stink on both ends of the floor. There's not a lot you can take away and point at and go, this is their bread and butter. This is where they're excited about. And they've been last in defense 3 years running. It would be 4 years running, but they finished 11th 4 years ago, breaking the pattern. Their offense sputtered. But last year, I think if you had to kind of take anything away per se, right, they finished a season with over half their roster was rookies, right? Like 7 out of the 12 players were first-year players. They had an interim head coach, right? It was kind of just like feeling it out, right? I think this is a story I wrote early in camp last year, but I think it was actually a boon for them. They were not good. 5-31 is a poor record, but it was I think a boon for them that they had so many rookies at the same time, because they can grow together. They can all ask questions that maybe another rookie didn't ask or didn't even think to ask, and that'll help them long term. But it's rookies are typically just not very good or impactful at the pro level and in any sport. And they had 7 of them out of their 12 players to finish the season, right? Like, it's hard to take anything away from that because they're all kind of rocky together and those mistakes kind of amplify on each other. Whereas this year, right, Melissa Smith is back, Lexi Hall is back, Queen Egbo is back, right? They have Destiny Henderson is back. Those are now second-year players. They don't have to do the pre-draft process coming into the season. They're more ready because they understand it. They have a lot of the same vets back, basically the exact same veteran core outside of Danielle Robinson. Aaliyah Boston looks great. Like, the takeaway from last year is just, to me, that having so many rookies close out the season together was about setting a foundation for improvement in future seasons when all of that kind of culminates at the same time.
So when I took a step back to look at the off season that has occurred heading into this season, I see that like you said, there aren't a bunch of changes to be made that were made by the Fever. The one obvious one is the addition of head coach Christy Sides. What early takeaways do you have from her?
She's awesome to talk to. She is super loud and energetic in practices. I don't mean any of that in a negative way, but it's really funny to like. And I posted a video on my Twitter feed, and the Fever posted it now too. Like the fourth training camp practice when she did media, she could barely talk. She had no voice left because she's just screaming and yelling. And you know, that again, that sounds, I don't mean that to sound derogatory at all. It's just she's loud and energetic all the time. And like, it's almost the buzzword for the team is energy. And so that's her thing. She said on her day off, she's drinking a lot of tea to get her voice back. And we had media day yesterday. She once again, you could tell, was losing her voice a little bit. So that's kind of what her thing's going to be. She's joked about being defensive minded too, picking up 94 feet the second you walk in the door for every practice. So I think this team's going to try to play faster under Christie's sides. I think they're going to be an aggressive defensive team, and their personality and their play style, I think, is going to be aptly described as loud.
As loud. Okay. Loud energy. I like these words, and I'm excited about where this Fever team is going. But we'll take it step by step here with the offseason. I want to start with the draft lottery, because to me, that was the most important part of the Fever's offseason, where they don't make a lot of moves. And in the draft lottery, the Fever have never won it coming into this season. They do it, and they get that number one overall pick. I guess from this standpoint, what were your expectations heading into the draft lottery? And yeah, how do you feel about going and getting Aaliyah Boston?
Yeah, the lottery is just like I was a math major in college, actually. So every year when they would have the best odds at number one and not get it again and again, I would do the odds that like they never got number one. And from 2017 until this past draft lottery, there was an 86% chance they would have gotten the number one pick at least once, but they didn't. The 14% chance is exactly what happened in that 5-year stretch. So they were due. And the funny thing about this one specifically is they had one of Boston's best teammates in South Carolina already on their team. And not to disrespect Diamond Miller or some of the other top picks, but like it was kind of a one-player draft. Like Boston was the prize of this class. So getting number one this year, it was even more important than maybe past years, just considering that drop-off. So really significant that they finally got the number one pick. They can bring in that franchise talent, even though for a second, there was some fear that Boston might stay for another season at South Carolina. She said she didn't really decide till after the SEC tournament when I asked her about it, but huge deal for them to win that lottery and to get her on the team, because they needed defense. She can defend. She's a great post presence. That's kind of something they needed as well. She's just really talented. She might be the best player on their team this year already. I don't know. Kelsey Mitchell's a really high bar to clear, but she looks great in their early practices and preseason games. So absolutely massive for them to finally win a draft lottery in this draft in particular.
I do. I love that take, Tony, but I am definitely siding with Kelsey Mitchell as of right now.
That's smart to do, I think. I am basing it off of a very small amount of sample. I don't even know what Kelsey or Leah would say, but man, she looks really good so far.
That and I it's just huge for this franchise, like you said. And that's a great way to start. We'll get more into the draft, but first, I wanted to go back to the one trade that the Fever made, and that is trading Danielle Robinson, kind of their vet from last year. They trade her for Christy Wallace with the Atlanta Dream. That also clears up the space where they go and they pick up Erica Wheeler. They pick up Maya Caldwell. That's a lot of Atlanta Dream members coming over. So I guess my first question regarding the swap of Robinson for Erica Wheeler, how will Wheeler provide kind of a different impact than what Danielle Robinson was able to provide?
Yeah, interesting moves, right? They get 3 Dream players right after poaching an assistant coach from the Dream too. And Danielle Robinson was a great vet for the Fever last year. Like that's a decently significant loss, but in the aggregate with the cap space element too, it was a good move for them to do all that. They're really different players, right? They're both on the other side of 30 at this stage, but you know, Robinson is definitely more defensive in her strengths, right? She's better on that end of the floor. She's a great communicator kind of player. And she's a solid point guard. She's a good passer too, but there were a lot of timing elements with a lot of young players that didn't really click for the Fever last year and made it tougher on a more setup kind of player like Robinson, whereas Wheeler, I feel like, can be more scoring punch, can provide more scoring punch. She won't provide as much on the defensive end, but for the Fever specifically, who, like you said, were last in offensive rating last year too, having a guard who can maybe break down the defense, be that scoring type, I think is big for them. She can be a leader in the locker room at her age, and she's been with sides both in Indiana and in Atlanta before, which I think is helpful for culture setting. Like, she's going to check a lot of boxes for what a young team kind of needs. What I'll be curious about with Wheeler is what she's kind of asked to do, right? Is it more take it up and then let Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston set up their stuff? Is it Wheeler, you can go hunt for your own shot? You know, what her role is kind of tough to say. She didn't play in their first preseason game after taking a tumble in camp, but I think in general, it's just a trade-off where Robinson was maybe more of a defender and Wheeler's more of an offensive talent at that one spot.
That's interesting because I know Wheeler, back when she played for the Sparks, that was a good defensive unit as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully she can head that up as well. Do you see maybe Destiny Henderson as that backup one? Do you see her challenging for that starting spot?
Yeah, I do think Wheeler can defend, just not at Robinson's level. But yes, I agree. I think Henny will be the backup one. Yeah. And she, not like she had some run with another point guard next to her last year. Henny did it like alongside D-Rob or other players like Caleb Pointer for a couple possessions. So I wouldn't be surprised if Henny came out there in like multiple ball handler units and ended up off the ball a little bit. And that is significant to me just because she's a really good shooter. And I can tell the Fever want to be a much better shooting team this year. They've been far and away the worst 3-point shooting team the last couple seasons, like several percentage points. So I think Henny's going to be the backup floor general running the show for that second unit, but I wouldn't be surprised if she stole some minutes at the 2 in some games just to provide a shooting element alongside other guards.
I think that's really interesting. I didn't really think about her really playing off ball a little as well last year. And that'll be interesting. I'm very curious to see where this team goes lineup wise. Obviously, they're above the roster limit right now, so I'm curious where that will end up. But before we get to that, one last thing with the offseason, and that is the draft. I felt like it's hard to mess up when you have the number 1 overall pick in a one-player draft, as you mentioned. And I think they went out and they did even better than that with Aaliyah Boston. They go and did the one Indiana University kid with Grace Berger. I loved the LaDasia Williams pick, even though she unfortunately not able to make this roster. But she had a great performance for LSU in that national championship. Taylor Meitzel, Victoria Saxton in the later rounds. Tony, how would you grade this draft?
Well, they picked a lot of champs in Aaliyah, LaDasia, and Saxon have all won a title at the college level. I think it's like exactly what they needed, kind of, right? Like Boston will give them that defensive anchor and communicator that, like I said, they haven't really had. And her technique and timing, I think, is going to be a step above any big they've started in the last couple seasons for a while, really. Berger, they like because of her versatility. Not that she can necessarily just play 1, 2, or 3, but that she can play all of 1, 2, or 3, right? Perhaps she's one of the players that split some of the ball handling duties with Destiny Henderson with the second unit. We'll see where the second unit shakes out. There's a lot of ways that kind of wing guard hybrid positions could go for them. But those 2 picks, so stuff they needed, right? I think those were kind of the positions, the wing-ish spot and the big spots that I thought they needed to target, and they did that with their first 2 picks. And for a team that has lacked shooting, look, Taylor Meitzel didn't shoot it particularly well in their preseason game, but I don't think she's missed like a single shot I've seen her take in their practice gym for training camp. Like, she just lights it up. She can really shoot it. So I don't know what her long-term outlook is with this team, but man, they went need with their first 3 picks and then 2 champs who could compete in camp with their last 2 picks. That's a good strategy. And, it's tough with LaDasia getting waived, like after being picked in the second round. We'll see what happens with Victoria, but it's just kind of the numbers game. I think we're going to talk about Engsler later, but they've had 12 picks in the last 2 drafts. Like, that's a full roster. There's going to be a lot of painfully awkward cuts for this team, both painful and awkward, just because of the numbers game, especially if they're keeping 3, 4, however many vets from season to season. And LaDasia just happened to be the first one of those, even though she was competing and doing what they wanted in camp. So, I think good draft for what they needed. Lynn Dunn loves drafting champs. She got 3 of them, excuse me. So they're excited about what this group can do and add to their 2022 draft class as well.
So I always, the question is how many of them are going to have the chance to make it. Rookies, it's hard for a rookie to make a roster in the WNBA. It just is. And we've already seen a few of those really tricky cuts. LaDasia we've obviously mentioned, but Emily Ensler, was kind of like a surprising cut early
Yes.
on in this process, and it made it what everybody said, what went around was 3 straight years the Fever have cut a top four pick from the season prior. So from this standpoint, how did you feel about it? What were kind of the optics around that?
Maybe the number 4 pick is cursed because Chandy Carter, before them too, has also been traded and waived by her prior teams. Look, the catchings regime did not draft very well, right? The Kaiser Gondrzick pick did not pan out at all. Only played in half a season for the team before getting cut. Lauren Cox at 3 also didn't really pan out for the team. They kind of opted to go a different direction in the rotation, and those players haven't really stuck anywhere else, which I think means that waiving them in the moment was the right choice. But it obviously gives a lot of questions about the draft process. And so I believe that their new front office is better at the talent evaluation and drafting part of this. Some of that they just have had higher picks, but I think they've done a better job with them. So of course, waiving a number 4 pick looks bad, especially for the 30 in a row. I think this one was like, now that I've seen them play really fast and put more of a premium on perimeter play and shooting, like I get where potentially Angsler's fit could have been clunky. They did it before camp, and she had this back injury playing in France, although she looks healthy for the Mystics and is playing pretty well for Washington so far. So maybe that had nothing to do with it. So I think it's just one of those painful decisions they had to make. They're still probably going to have a really hard decision on who their last cut is going to be, and they would have had to do 2 tough ones had Angsler been in the mix as well. I thought Emily Angsler was going to be on the team this year, to be totally clear. Like when I was projecting their 12, she was one of them. So I was really surprised, especially before camp even started, and especially given their history too. But I think that the lost context of that is the transition to a new front office. I think there's a lot more faith in this group than the last one. And in general, the fact that they've had 12 picks in 2 years means there's going to be a lot of these cuts that are a little head scratching, which is not at all the case for basically any other team in the league, even though there's, like the number 8 pick last year got cut before they even played a game, right? Like it is just kind of how the W structure tends to work with the number of roster spots available. So of course it's not good when you're cutting your number 4 pick the next year. That is not good. But I think the context of the Fever and where they're headed now makes it a little more understood than the previous 2 number 4 picks, if that makes any sense.
Sure. And I like that you acknowledged, because I was very high on Instler after last year. I'm
Me too.
excited. I'm excited for her on the Mystics because
Yeah.
I think that's a team that could use kind of that forward spot in the middle. But okay, that we'll take that. Any other training camp battles that you're seeing? Obviously, I'm looking at 14, 15 players. Needs to get down to at least 12. What do you see as being kind of those last cuts?
Yeah, Betty hasn't come from Hungary yet, so TBD on what the status of that even is. Maybe that becomes a suspended contract, maybe just an outright waiver, who knows. So getting rid of that one, you're down to 14, and you still got to make 2, which is really tough for what this group is. Like Victoria would have been the obvious choice, and I still think she probably ends up on the outside looking in, but she's played pretty well in camp. She's battled with Leah Boston for years and years in a row. She played well in their preseason game. Like she survived longer than LaDeja despite getting picked later. Like she's been solid, especially in some of these mid-range shooting drills I can see them do. And then if she does stick, then it's even harder. Like Maya Caldwell's been a little bit hurt. She hasn't played much in camp, so I don't know what they envision for her, what she can provide. Who are these last slots going to be? Christy Sides, when talking about it at Media Day, said culture and defense. Her strong things that she cares the most about will be kind of their tiebreakers, right? If you can defend really well, or you're a great culture setter and leader, they're probably going to keep you around. So I guess that's how it would be decided. I would guess the last cut is probably going to be one of Caldwell, Paul, Mike Suller, Cannon, I suppose. But again, I am kind of guessing because there's good reason to keep literally all of their 14 players. So it does just feel like I'm totally pulling names out of a hat, but just given the lineups that they used in the minutes, I suppose that it's it. But even Lexi Hall's playing a lot too, so maybe she should be removed from that crew. It's really, really hard to say. And again, they've had 12 picks in the last 2 years. Like this is the consequence of that. You got to have 12 players on your team. We'll see what they decide to do.
Yeah, and it sucks because it's the conversation I've had with each one of these previews that I've been working on, and yeah, there just aren't enough spots. I am curious.
Right.
Christy Wallace, Lexi Hull, Taylor Meisel that seem to almost fill the same spot, and I'm curious if they all make it, if only some of them make it, but we'll table that for whenever that decision
Well,
happens. Oh
so
yeah, go ahead.
so before the last couple days, I would have thought of Wallace kind of maybe nearer the cut line than I do now. But in their first preseason game, Wheeler was out, sure, but Wallace started. She was their starting one. And then in some practice settings, I don't know what they're thinking for their starting five, to be totally clear. But what I would assume is a group that they are saying is something representing their starting five has had Wallace on the wing. Maybe Victoria Vivians gets that spot at some point. Maybe Lexi Hall does. She's had some work in that role as well. But given Wallace's leadership abilities, how she's been talked about, what she's good at, I think she's almost certainly a lock, but I thought that about Angsler too. So, I'm supposed to be the person who knows the most about this team because I watch them every single day. But I think Wallace is the most likely of those three to stick. There's a lot of those kind of hybrid positions that are hard to say, though.
Sure. And
sorry, continue.
no, absolutely. It's a tough call, and I appreciate that insight too because it's so unpredictable. But
Yep.
let's get into some of the more fun things about this this roster. Some more fun questions. You said offensively you expect them to get out and run a little bit more, and I think that's really interesting with the low post threats that they have brought in. Melissa Smith last year, Aaliyah Boston this year, and defensively, I mean that's just something Lynn Dunn has prioritized the last couple of seasons since she has taken over. What do you expect to see from them on both sides of the wall?
That energy is gonna, I think, be reflected in their play. What we've seen in the media, like we can't see all of training camp. We only get to see the last, 20, 30 minutes of their practice in the media visible portions. A lot of transition play. I think that's going to be a focus for them defensively and offensively, getting back when after they miss or whatever, and running when they can off of misses, maybe even off of makes. I think they want to be a transition heavy team. They've been really focused on like this is a basic thing, like in general, but like the spots on the floor to run to. They've got these X's on the court and in the dunker spot where they want to go and they're flying up and down the floor. And again, that's a simple thing, but for a young team that kind of struggled with some of those simpler things last year, you can never overlook those little things. So I think that's going to be something that is going to be worth monitoring for them, is how much they can play in transition and how much can they cover up some of their warts, right? Because they're going to be an inconsistent team. Young players typically are. The game hasn't slowed down for them yet, so they have to think more than just act, right? Like in general, they're going to still probably be one of the bottom 4 or 5 teams in the league, but how can they overcome that? Is it good transition play? Is it really aggressive defense that Christy Sides wants to play? Is Leah Boston just that good on offense that she can elevate them into the 7, 8, 9 offensive rating range, and then all of a sudden you're playing more half court defense, and that's easier, right? Like there's all these tug and pull kind of things that'll go on, but I think they can be better on both ends. There's a way to do it, but it'll depend on if they can play to their identity every single night, or if young player inconsistencies will make that hard.
Yes, the main theme I think is this is just such a young team. I'm looking at their roster, and it's a majority is players in their first or in their rookie or their sophomore season. And I think the oldest player, the longest tenured player in the W is Erica Wheeler, who just got here, but is in her 8th season, I believe. So, I mean, just an incredibly young team. Who do you think steps up as the leader of this roster?
Off the court, I think it'll be Wheeler, because of her, how long she's been around. And because she's done it for multiple franchises, I think that's important. And she's done it with Sides before. Like Sides was really big after getting hired on, what they did in Atlanta last year, setting a culture. Now, that was honestly more like they were good. They were one game from the playoffs, but like that was more important to them than how they played with a new coach and Tanisha Wright and a bunch of new players. It was setting that in place so that every year they can continue to build on that. Like having 3 players really, but especially Wheeler, who have seen that up close, both when Sides was with Wheeler in Indiana and Atlanta, and could kind of implement it somewhere else. I think that's really significant. So from a generalized version of the word leader, right, locker room off the court, I think Edub's going to be big in that way. I think Kelsey Mitchell has been challenged to be more of the leader, right? She's been with Indiana her entire career and has been a leader, to be clear, for a lot of it. But like, I think this year specifically, she's being challenged to do even more in that aspect of her game and in that aspect of her life, in terms of being that kind of person. And she was, I think Sides even kind of explained that she told Mitchell and every player, like, hey, if you're going to come to the gym for individual work, bring a teammate. Like make those little moments something that's building for more than just you, for everybody. So I think it'll be those two leading the way. They like Emma Cannon, of course, as an off-court person as well. She's back again. with this team. So those three stand out to me, mostly because they're three of the four players that I think will be on a team that have more than 1 or 2 years of experience in the league, but also because of their background, both with sides and in the league. I think they will naturally become those leaders.
Oh, well, and hopefully as Lindon keeps drafting these champions, bringing in these college champions, hopefully those are at least lead by example as well as we head into the season. I have one more question for you here, Tony, before we get into some fun predictions at the end. But that one more question would be the low post. I'm curious how the offense runs when you have Melissa Smith, who is very good in the low post, and Aaliyah Boston coming in the low post. How do you see those two fitting together?
Good question. I think they're curious how it'll work too. Like the way Melissa has described it is, she tweeted this right after the draft, right? A lot of high-low action, I think, is what they kind of hope it can be. Watching them in what they try to do on offense, I think that's going to be mostly accurate. One of them kind of elbow spacing or even opposite side corner spacing, the other one kind of being interior, and that alternates based on where the ball is. But their fit's going to be fascinating, right? Melissa Smith was awesome in Athletes Unlimited this summer, and she's a good player. She's going to play awesome, but some of it was that she was playing the five, right? Like how those two coexist together is totally worth monitoring for the Fever. What's the best way to maximize the two of them together on the floor is going to be huge, and I think the high-low game is going to be part of it. I think generally just building chemistry, figuring out how to attack around each other is going to be part of it because you can't really double either one. They both have good enough footwork and scoring abilities to make that happen. So I don't know the full answer because we haven't seen them play together, and spacing is certainly an element that this Fever team is chasing with their three-point shooting. But the high-low aspect of it, one at the opposite elbow and one on the block, or the quick-moving ball that the Fever hope to have, I think will solve hopefully a lot of those potentially clunky is the wrong word, but potential fit issues if there even are any.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, want to monitor. Before we get to the fun predictions as well, kind of we've said like we don't know who's gonna start at this point. We know Erica Wheeler, Kelsey Mitchell, Melissa Smith, Aaliyah Boston. That feels safe enough to me. But heading into, I guess, like if you're trying to close out a game, who do you think is this team's best five lineup?
Ooh, good question. Erica Wheeler's in there, Kelsey Mitchell's in there, Aaliyah Boston's in there, and Melissa Smith's in there. The first four is super easy. And then the fifth player, are they down by 3? Are they up by 3? That I think is the factor here. I think probably their best wing defender is going to be Lexi Hall. She won Defensive Player of the Year in AU. She was a good defender at Stanford. I think their best offensive weapon on the wing might be Victoria Vivians if she can get her shot going a little bit better. I think the balance might be Wallace. There's a lot of players that it could be like if they really need a shooting punch, do they take one of Smith and Boston off and like get Caldwell in there or get Taylor Mikesell in there if she makes the team? Like, I don't know who the fifth player is, but I can give you a pretty good hunch of who the four are. And I think the situation, maybe even the opponent matchup wise, could dictate who the fifth is. But it's really tough to say. They have a lot of good options on the wing, and they've really valued in the draft and their acquisitions positional versatility. And I think that's because of those exact situations where they can kind of tinker a little bit. Sides even said in their preseason games, they almost viewed it like a football game where you really game plan out like the plays over and over. They did that with kind of their lineups to like mix and match and see who fits together. So I think that will be a factor as well.
Versatility is something that gets brought up more and more in these interviews I have to preview, but that I like that for the Fever, and I think that's a good place to be for their stage. Speaking of where they're at, let's get into some of these fun predictions real fast and try and go down the line here. But is this the year that the Fever can break that playoff drought? Haven't made it since 2016. What's your win-loss prediction, Tony?
40 games, right? So you got to calculate a new record every year. I'm like, okay, they played 32 last year. But wait, no, now they played 36. But wait, now so it's not the easiest to do that. Yeah, the playoff drought will be fascinating, right? Did they improve enough? And at the same time, did like Chicago, Minnesota, Seattle, did those teams drop enough that they can pass? I guess Minnesota didn't make it, but are there enough teams that they can pass beyond their own growth to make it? And from a record perspective, look, like I get why, and I think they will be a better team than last year. They're also coming from a base of 5 wins, right? Like that is a very low starting point. And so I think they will be better. Between all the changes they had last year. They played in 3 stadiums, right? I talked about some of that instability earlier. Like they'll naturally improve from that. How much is the question? If you maybe just guess right now, like 12, 13 wins would kind of be the number that stands out to me in my head. I'm guessing the last playoff spot's going to be closer to like 16 or 17. Last year's teams that got in, I think we're at 15, right? So close to that range, I think is where they're going to end up. But if Boston really is as good as I think she could be, or if their new style really gels with the kind of the younger team they have and the experience and new coach all click, I can see them getting up to maybe that 17, 18 range. But I've had to guess again. We're talking about a team that went 5-31 last year. I'd say, 13-27 feels like a good attainable starting point.
Yeah, right as you were mentioning that, I was thinking 14 sounded about right.
Yeah, that's a good.
For the Fever. So yeah, I hopeful for them. Obviously, hopeful for all of these teams at this stage in the preseason. But I like that. I like that. Going into awards specific to this team in the 2023 campaign, who is your Fever MVP?
Yeah, I said Boston might be better, but I got to give it to Kelsey Mitchell just because she can provide more of that veteran stuff too. Like, I guess most valuable player implies we're only talking about the actual the game part of it, but most valuable person and player, I think, is going to be Kelsey Mitchell, fringe all-star last year. Should be better just naturally by being older and having a little bit better talent around her. I've got to give it to Kelsey Mitchell, but again, I'm very high on what Aaliyah Boston could be.
And I mean, Kelsey Mitchell's got to be an all-star this year, right? That
I was
was
stunned she didn't make it last year. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, agreed. Most improved player for this team.
Oh, a lot of good candidates here, right? I think they naturally have a lot of candidates because first year to second year should be a natural growth point, right? So you could immediately point to Smith or Hall or Egbo or Henderson and go, yeah, any of them could win most improved. I would assume that, Egbo moving from starter to backup means least likely in that case. So, man, I mean, Lexi Hall, I think it has the most room to grow, which might give her the nod in my head. I think Henny could win it too. Any of those second year players could. If you made me pick right now, I'm picking Lexi Hall, but any of the second years would not surprise me.
Well, we're hoping for Lexi Hall as well, that she has a good year this year. I'm hoping it's with the Fever as well. Sixth player of the year for this Fever squad.
If the starting wing is Wallace, then I'd say Victoria Vivians is probably the sixth player of the year. Coming off the benches there, like good wing sized player on both ends of the floor and shooting offensive threat. But maybe it's Egbo if she can be a threat at the 5 off the bench. Maybe if Wallace does not end up starting, it's Wallace because of her versatility. Maybe it's Henny as a scorer. I think any of them could be in the mix, but whoever I think between Tori and Wallace does not start would be my answer there.
Defensive player of the year.
Aaliyah Boston next. that one's easy. I mean, they were terrible on defense last year, and she's fantastic at that.
All right, and I hope we see some significant defensive strides for this team as well.
Yeah.
Here's a good one for the Fever because they have so many. But rookie of the year.
Yeah, I'd pick Boston again, obviously there. But Berger, I think, is gonna help them, right? I think the tenacious way she plays is gonna be interesting. And Mike Shell could end up being their best shooter in year one. Like all of them, if they make it or they're around, have a shot. But yeah, you got to go with Leah Boston.
And so lastly, I like to finish up with some superlatives. So from your vantage point, being around the team, covering the beat, who is the unsung hero for this roster?
My early guess will be Christy Wallace because of everything she can kind of do for this team, and she's going to plug some holes and maybe be a shooter that they need. Henny, I think, is going to potentially be an unsung hero as a steady ball handler who can shoot it. There's some good choices there. So I think I'll go with one of those two, but there could be a lot. They have a lot of players who are like on the cusp of being pretty important, if that makes any sense.
It seems fitting for Wallace, though.
Yeah.
Class clown for this team. Who is the most funny member of the Fever?
Queen Egbo is hilarious. She would be she was my gut instinct when I saw that one on the list. Yeah, she's really funny and goofy all the time. I think she's even talked about like in year 2 knowing to be a little more professional and when to be that kind of person, but she's exceedingly goofy a lot of the time. Victoria Vivians is pretty goofy as well, but the class clown, yeah, I'm going to Queen Egbo.
That surprised me a little bit. I like that.
She's funny. Yeah.
Okay. But lastly here, the best trash talker. Who are you going to tell me that?
Nalissa Smith is my gut comes to my head best trash talker on the team. It's hard because a lot of times I can hear them and see them trash talking. It's in practice to like themselves. You know what I mean? It's less like in game moments to opponents. Tierra McCowan used to be a really big trash talker, but she's obviously with the Wings now. I'm just trying to think back on moments of my time covering this team. Yeah, I think Alyssa Smith's my answer. They're like a lot of like chippy but not trash talking types on this roster, I would say.
Yeah, I think Erica Wheeler is gonna do a little bit.
Wheeler's a good one too. I don't know her well enough to have really seen it all, but I would guess she'll be in that mix as well. Yeah.
All right, Tony.
Good call.
Thank you so much for coming on here. For right now, can you tell everybody where they can find your work?
Yeah, covering this Fever team, it's all at the Next Hoops. We've got our season previews for W teams coming super soon. Season starts next week. Looking forward to that. And I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East if you want to read about the Fever there, and a lot of Pacers tweets in that mix as well. So if you're only there for Fever stuff, I apologize that it's a mixed feed of teams.
I love it. Hey, big fan of the work that you do. Any last takes you want to get in before the start of the 2023 WNBA season?
Yeah, the Fever may not be the best team in the league, but they're going to be much more fun to watch than in past seasons. That's what I would say.
Definitely excited to watch them go. Tony East, thank you so much for taking the time on a pro basketball show.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into a pro basketball show. You can catch a pro basketball show on streaming services such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with live broadcasts on playback. Make sure to follow us at APBShow on social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram, with more coming soon. Until next time, I am Andrew Willett. Thank you for tuning in.